one of my biggest influences were the teachers in my music education field. I did do a double major in my undergrad as a violin performance and in music education in the public schools, and I think the teachers that I worked with in the public schools, teaching, for 8 hours a day, 100 kids each day in an orchestra room, full of 3, 4, 5th graders. I think that really inspired me. Their dedication, their love for music, and their love of teaching kids of all backgrounds how to love music and how to express themselves in different ways. That's really that was really a big inspiration to me.
My biggest influences as a violinist, let's say, was one of my teachers at Israel, Chaim Taub. And the reason for that was that it's not that he necessarily knew much more than my other teachers, or that he was more dedicated to me than my other teachers were, because they were all knowledgeable and all dedicated to their craft. But I think that he was probably the first that developed in me a sense of truly sharpening my skills. Whereas before, I was what we call playing a little bit more through talent versus actual firm skill. And he truly instilled this discipline in me, which I lacked prior to studying with him. And as far as a chamber musician, well, we all have idols that we look up to. In my case, it's people like Shmuel Ashkenazi from, very famous Vermeer Quartet. They're no longer in existence, but have been playing together for 35 or more years, and members of the Guarneri String Quartet like Steinhardt and David Sawyer and Michael Tree. So these are some of the people that I look up to as a solo musician and chamber musician as well.
My role models are many, but I would say the most important, I'll start with Cello Mentors. As a youngster, I began to study with Orlando Cole, who was the founding cellist of the Curtis String Quartet and a member of the group until it's having disbanded after some 75 years in existence. And he had joined the faculty at Curtis in the early 30s and taught there until shortly before his death in 2008. And he was, in the very best way, a gentleman of the old world. Besides being a tremendous teacher who had a very organized and regimented approach of how to take a student from point A to point B, and certainly the most important early serious teacher, he simply loved and knew, it seemed to me, everything about music. And so the combination of these things inspired me to begin to seek the truth, as it were, in music. And then later in graduate school, I studied with one of his former students, Ron Leonard, the longtime principal of the LA Phil, who I would go as far as saying is probably the best cello teacher I've encountered any place, in terms of his ability to immediately diagnose, identify, and prescribe a solution for any technical problem any student has, and approaches all the music, despite his having played the entire repertoire over all these years, again, as if he's seeing it for the first time. He was never married to any particular way of solving technical problems or interpreting the music. So that aspect alone is in my mind every time I sit down to play, to question whether the fingering or bowing I'm doing even if I did it yesterday and we discussed it, today I might decide that it was the worst idea. As far as quartets, the Guarneri Quartet is bar none the standard for me. There was never prior, and there hasn't been since, a quartet where the basic level of playing of all four members was so perfectly matched as in their group, added to which, despite the fact that they questioned and fought for the music, of course, over all those years, they came from the same kind of training, and they approached making music and producing sound on their instruments in more or less a unified way. So this makes them as a group sound the way they do. Outside of music, I would be remiss if I neglected to mention my two biggest role models from the wider world, which will probably be a surprise in this context, but Nolan Ryan and Lance Armstrong.
I would say my main musical influence was my primary teacher at Eastman School of Music, Zvi Zeitlin. He was a wonderful artist, a brilliant man, spoke like 7 languages fluently, was well-read, played the violin with that old world charm. He had heard live in concert people like Fritz Kreisler, which influenced him deeply throughout his career. And just to be able to study with somebody from that generation and hear about his work directly with Stravinsky and some of the iconic musicians of the 20th century was very inspiring, and something I carry with me to this day. He was a relentless taskmaster in terms of technique, and had very high standards, and lessons were often very difficult for that reason, but I'm grateful to him for instilling in me the technical foundation and musical curiosity that I have.